Devlog number 2 of my journey of creating a video game and having 1 million users playing it. Long story short, now I have an ogre that it's basically indestructible. And that's basically the whole progress in the last, I don't know, 1 month. Nah, that's not true. Well, kind of. The thing is, I'm building this game from scratch. That means that I wrote the 3D renderer, the game engine, basically everything from scratch. So every single thing that you see on the screen takes forever to make because before me making it, it basically doesn't exist. Anyway, let's just start talking about the features and the progress I have so far. Feature number 1, make the renderer render in smaller resolutions, because a pixelated effect is basically an image that is being rendered in a small resolution but then gets upscaled to the size of the window, plus a filtering that doesn't have any effects between each pixel, so the transition is kind of rough, plus disabling multisampling. I decided to have this pixelated effect because, well, I'm basically relearning 3D graphics, especially 3D graphics programming. So creating something that looks polished, it's a 1,000,000,000% not a chance right now. So yeah, pixel art is the way to go. Feature number 2 is 3D attachments. So for example, having the ogre have like a blade or a weapon attached to one hand, that looks pretty simple, right? But it will be simple if I was using a game engine where I can just drag the blade on the ogre hand and the blade will just follow whatever transformation that hand has. But nah, bro, this is my own game engine. That means that is my own 3D importer and my own 3D exporter. So I am the ones that had to create how that works. So what I did is I added this property in the hand bone in Blender that is called child of bone, and it's a reference to the blade mesh of the ogre. And then I refactored the exporter and the importer to read all the transformations that the blade has on each pose of the animation, and putting them as its own transformations in the code in C++. So let's continue. Feature number 3, lights. And lights, this is one of the parts of game development from scratch that I actually have quite some experience on. Most of that experience were in OpenGL, but the principle is basically the same. So we have 2 types of lights. We have a sun and we have points. And the sun is basically a directional light. That means that we take into account the direction in which the sun is pointing at, and that's basically, we don't use the distance and we don't use like the radius, for example. So if we do an initial pass, you guys can see that initially we only have like a flat surface per each pixel. And this style is cool when you don't mind presenting just silhouettes of everything. But for my characters, it does feel a little bit meh. Normals are basically vectors that tells you on which direction a face is pointing at. If we visualize them in the shader, we're gonna really see some information that allows us to create the effect of something being lit by a light, basically. And for example, choose 2 colors, in my case a dark gray and a light gray, and do a linear interpolation between them based on how high the pixel is. And for the high information, we use the Z position of the normal. And basically with that, we already have something that already looks like it's being lit by something. If you then multiply that with the fragment color, you get this. Also, if we clamp that value to be restricted between 0 and 1, the shadows becomes lighter. So a surface that is being lit by a sun, for example, can be calculated by getting the dot product between the normal and the direction of the sun. Uh, so you get that scalar value, which is a float, and you multiply it by the intensity on the sun, and you get basically more realistic shading. But it looks ugly as hell because if you do that, the fragment is trying to smoothly transition between each pixel. But this is a low poly surface with low poly resolution, so hence the ugly thing, right? Say welcome to the tomb shader. So Hemi interpolation is basically this S-like shape between two edges. So if you do the interpolation by adding and subtracting some values like 0.42 to the dot product, you get something like that looks way cooler. But we can do even better. If instead of using random values to add and subtract the dot product, you find how fast the pixel changes across the neighbor pixels, you can prevent them to have that weird gradient like shading, so the shadows becomes cooler in the object. Lastly, for that clean tone flag shadow, you can do linear interpolation to the Hermit interpolation from some small value to 1. Now for the point lights, we go through all the point lights. We calculate the distance of that light to this specific pixel, and based on that distance and some manual tweaking, we calculate the attenuation, which is how fast the light decreases depending on how far it is. We use the same trick of interpolating between two edges for the dot product of the normal and the direction of this point light, and we get this ring light effect that is based on the distance and intensity of each point light. Now for the final result and the final color, it would be basically just the fragment color, which is the flag surface, multiplied by the sum of the lights of the sunlight plus the sum of all the point lights that we have on the scene. So feature number 4 is basically the ogre itself. More information about it is that at first it was supposed to look like, you know, the normal Shrek-like ogre that is green and ugly, but I was vibing with Blender and I ended up having this bluish mystical kind of creature that for some reason I really like because it's kind of like bulky, but it has some touches of gold that make him looks like he can fight, and it's some sort of divine creature, you know. I intentionally made the horns like that. They don't look symmetric at all, and there's a reason for that. I am basically thinking of writing some lore information about this whole game at some point, so the way it looks right now will have some explanation later. Feature number 5 is physics, and yeah, I started that physics engine. Just saying. So a little secret about physics: it doesn't exist. Everything that you see is just an illusion and can be calculated as an illusion. You see that chunk of code over here? That is gravity right there. It basically just keep moving down until you reach the floor. That's it. That's it. That's gravity. Then, if at some point you add velocity to that object in any direction, it will go to that direction and eventually just stop going there and start going down. And just with that, we have physics. So again, it's an illusion. And yeah, that is all the progress I have so far. It's not too much, but I mean, I'm not rushing anything. I want to take my time. I want to make sure this game is exactly what I want. I am also planning and implementing on the fly. And yeah, having fun, just, you know, throwing any idea that I have into this game. So yeah, if you like the video, remember subscribe, like, comment, give your suggestion for the next character. Let me know what do you think could be cool attacks that I can make the Ogre do, because that is another thing that I am working on right now. And yeah, peace.